Hello everybody, today we are going to be starting C. I know my video is one day late. I was supposed to upload on Monday due to my schedule, but things, got mixed up and I decided to upload today instead because it would be much easier. Tomorrow's video will still come out tomorrow as long as everything goes as planned. Anyways, today we're going to be getting into C. C is a very interesting language, but it is also a very advanced language. C is what we like to call a lower level language. I'm not going to go ahead and say it's a low level programming language because low level really refers to assembly and machine code, which is, binary zeros and ones. But C and C++ are low level languages when you compare it to something like Python or Java, etc. And because of that, they're a lot more powerful. And when we speak of lower level, we don't mean that it's a lot easier to code, it's lower level. Um, in advance, like in the, I don't know what you'd call it, the programming hierarchy, like how difficult it is and its difficulty. But what it basically means is you can get closer to the metal. And what that terminology means is you can get closer to the processor, you can get closer to the hardware. It's much more powerful. And that's why C++ is commonly used for game engines, or at least big game engines that things like Frostbite and all these big companies use, is based off C++. Now, because of this great power, as the saying goes, comes great responsibility. Because with C, because of how powerful it is, it can also be very deadly. It is much easier to screw things up in C, and it can be catastrophic, such as in Python. In C and C++, there's something called boundary overflows or buffer overflows. And what those basically are is when you define a space in memory, say like an array or a list or whatever, and you have 16 items in it. Let's say you had 16 items in Python, and then you try to write on the 18th item in a list. Python won't let you do it. It'll throw you an exception because it'll say, hey, you don't have an 18th item in there, right? But when you go to do that in C, it doesn't have boundary checking. It'll let you do it. But the problem is there is no um, 18th element in the array. So instead of writing to that space of memory, it'll write to the adjacent memory beside it, allowing people to do something called code injection, where they can exploit that bound buffer overflow, and they can insert code into your program and hack into it. Basically, we're sort of moving into software security and hacking and exploitation, and we're gonna jump back to programming. But that's just kind of an interesting introduction into C and how bad things can go if you don't know what you're doing. So if you were very new to programming, um, if you're new to programming, new to the channel, you should probably go ahead and check out Python or PHP. C is probably not the language you want to start with. Um, so yeah, that's debatable, but let's go ahead and get into the actual tutorial. So to start C, what you're going to need first is an IDE, because C is what we like to call a compiled language. When you talk about something like Python, Python is a interpretive language. Means the code is interpreted to the processor as it is read from your script as it's executed. But compiled code, you write the compiled code all at once, and then something called the compiler and the linker will basically take your code, all your readable, nice English stuff, and it'll break it down so that to something that the processor can read, which is basically zeros and ones, machine code, binary, whatever you want to call it. And the actual exe of your program is completely unreadable to you, and yeah, it's like looking into a million zeros and ones. Um, so C is a lot more English, and that's why I'm saying that C isn't low level compared to something like assembly or machine code. So you're going to need an IDE, and I recommend Code Blocks. It's a nice little IDE. You can do more than C in it. I believe you can do Lisp, you can do C++, which we might get into. You can do Haskell. You can do a whole bunch of interesting things like functional programming. But we're going to stick with C right now, as per this tutorial. And yeah, so let's get on into actually coding our Hello World introductory program into C. So what we're going to first need to do is we're going to need to include a preprocessor directive. And that might sound like a big scary word, but that just basically means we need to include a standard input-output class to be able to even print anything on the screen. Because there's no built-in functions just in C. You need to include a class to even use the print function. So let's go ahead and do that now. So how do you define a preprocessor directive? Very simple. You hit the hashtag button, you hit include, You hit the, I'm guessing that's the greater than sign, stdio.h. There's many different header files. We're not going to bother with these today. We're just going to bother with stdio.h, and we're going to hit the lesser than symbol. And there we go. So there's our preprocessor directive. So some of you may be wondering, what does stdio.h mean? This stands for standard input output and then header file. Header files always end with .h. We're going to get more into that later. You don't really have to understand what all that means right now. Now, we cannot just put code here. We can't just put print f, hello. We can't just do that, because that will not work. If we go ahead and try to build that, it will give you an error code. And we can go ahead and check the build messages. But anyways, it's an unexpected declaration, right? Because it's looking for a function, because C is functional based, right? So we need to go ahead and define a function. Now, one thing that's interesting with functions in C is, if you've ever coded C++ or Java, this will look familiar to you. You need to declare the data type that your method or function will be returning before you actually make your function. So if your function was returning a string, you would do str, or you'd type in string, sorry, not str. Or if it was returning a double, you'd do double. Or if it was returning nothing, you do void. But the automatic function that C++ looks for is, sorry about that, the microphone cut out, but basically what C is looking for is the data type declaration. Now, what C always looks for by default when you execute a program is the int main. So int is basically short for integer, which is a data type. Maybe we'll go into data types later on in videos, but integer is just a whole number, not a decimal number, but a whole number. So inside of these brackets, you could put the bracket up here. I usually do, but most people who code C put them directly beneath each other. I think that makes the code a little bit easier to read with code blocks, but it's your own personal preference, to be honest. In here, we're going to type printf, and then we can hit these little double quotation marks to indicate that we are printing a string, and we can put hello world. There we go. We always need semicolons at the end of lines in C, similar to that of PHP, if you watch those videos. Now, you don't need this part, but it is generally a good coding practice is return 0. And that is just because the method is expecting an integer to be returned. If we don't have this in here, it'll just return with a random number. But let's just return it with 0 and make it easier on ourselves. So if we go ahead and click build and run, it'll say hello world, process returns 00x0. That's just basically a hexadecimal code for your space and memory. Your execution time, it's kind of interesting to look at. And press any key to continue, and when you do, it will exit out of it. So there's our basic hello world program. We're not going to get too far into it today. I hope you guys enjoyed the tutorial. If you did, please leave a like below. Comment any questions or comments you guys may have on the video, and subscribe. Feel free to go check out my Facebook and Twitter page, as my videos are automatically posted to them when they are uploaded. So if you want them the latest, you can go ahead and subscribe on those pages. Like the Facebook page, and follow me on Twitter. And if you would like to get discussions going, I'd like to get discussions going on social media. Not that the YouTube comment section is bad, it's just much easier to follow on social media because notifications are much more accessible and etc. And YouTube sometimes does weird things with comments where I don't see your comment, and etc. So yeah, that's our introduction to C. In our next video in C, we're probably going to be getting into a little bit more, talking about data types and uh, and functions a little bit more, and maybe making another function and calling it. And until then, I will see you guys later. And tomorrow we will be getting into Java, very fun language. And I will see you guys then.